Campaign 2018 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, Marshfield Clinic Health System, AARP Wisconsin, and Campaign 2018 partner Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel.
Republican Representative Janel Brandtjen of Menomonee Falls is seeking re-election in the 22nd Assembly District. Welcome back to WisconsinEye.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
I asked this question of all incumbents. If you're re-elected, top priority in the next session, please.
I think top priority is dealing with health care.
Health care. Well,
and I should say the insurance or should we prioritize that, is insurance.
Okay. Now the reinsurance plan, the $200 million plan, that helped, but that's kind of a short-term solution. Is that kind of what you're referring to?
No, I think there are other solutions out there. I mean,
Okay.
Wisconsin was unique in the sense that we had a high-risk, the HERTZ program, and that high-risk program allowed everyone to be covered. And what's beautiful about the program is, number one, I think almost 93% of individuals in Wisconsin had health care and were insured. And those numbers are very high. As a matter of fact, since we've implemented Obamacare, unfortunately, those numbers have dropped. What was beautiful about the program, it was based on how much you could pay. So it was based on the insurance company and the state. So all three was a tripartisan relationship. And like I said, initially it was means tested. So everybody, if you were wealthy or poor or whatever stage you were at life, it made sure that there was insurance for you.
You think we'll have to go back to HERTZ?
You know, I think those kind of solutions are really what we're talking about. The point of it was that it removed those that were the highest risk, made sure they had access to care based on what they could pay, but more importantly, that made sure that the rates for the rest of us were held down. Those kinds of solutions that Wisconsin was forward thinking, I think we might have to go back to make sure that we, as you said, the payment for now took care of the short-term rates, but the individual insurance market needs to have the opportunity for stability. I mean, their concern is lowering the risk. And since we are all risk adverse, that's the point of insurance.
Does HERTZ work in the rural areas, Representative?
It worked for everybody.
It did.
And I think the concerns that we have now, I mean, it's always funny, things kind of recircle. As we're looking to make sure that everybody gets coverage, we can't just continue to be part of the solution of Obamacare was just paying less and less for more services, that were combined. And at some point, a doctor who takes out the kind of loans that they do, nurse practitioner, they have to be paid a wage that allows them to be competitive. So instead of talking about just cutting costs all the time, I think we should also talk about adding in market competition, because competition, as we know, is really the solution. Think about your phone company. If your phone company, we only had one phone, all the opportunities that we would have missed. The same thing you don't want to have with just having single payer. All the opportunities, because single payer won't fit everyone, a family, an individual, someone who's divorced the same way.
The state government have a duty to recruit and retain doctors, nurses, and other medical professionals?
It certainly makes a healthy state. I think the biggest thing we have is, again, the competition. We're looking at a huge demographic change. Everybody, every market, police officers, scientists, teachers, you name it, welders, we're all suffering because we have a huge demographic change. Our baby boomers are retiring. So what does that mean? That means things are going to be done differently in the next 10, 20, 30 years. And those changes may seem scary at first, but that's one of the benefits that we have. We're now using telemedicine. What a great way to get that first initial diagnosis and then move people into either a general practitioner or move them into somebody who is a specialist.
State government and Delta Dental partner to subsidize dental clinics in medically underserved areas. Should that remain a priority in the next MA budget?
I think the point was access to care, to make sure that the difference between going to a dentist and going to a doctor dentist and going to a physician, the difference is that they're two different services. The dentist is usually a single provider who, someone who has their own individual practice, versus the hospitals now own own many of the contracts for the doctors. So there's a big difference there. Making sure that people have a personal responsibility to doing primary care, make sure you have cleanings and all that is a huge step forward into making sure that you have good dental health, which we know ties into your personal health. So there is personal responsibility that's part of that. The clinics, I think, were a way to make sure that people were realizing that it's something that instead of paying for your cell phone that you need to do as maintenance for getting your teeth clean, oral hygiene, those things are important going forward.
AARP has an estimate that 578,000 Wisconsin residents are caregivers. That raises this question: would you support a law or a rule that hospitals must recognize and work with families who are caregivers when a loved one is hospitalized?
You know, I thought we were pretty forward thinking in that. I don't know that it needs to be a rule, but I think Wisconsin, our Midwest roots, that is part of our nature, is being caregivers. I think we do recognize it, and I think the state's done a good job of providing when you say care, are you talking about?
I'm talking about a caregiver providing for a family member or a neighbor, another loved one, then they enter a hospital. Do we need a rule clarifying the rights of caregivers in those settings?
I guess I'm a little confused as to.
Okay, I understand.
Yeah. Okay.
We can move on. You've been a part of the caucuses on transportation funding, the impasse in the Capitol. How do you think it should be broken? How can we arrive at a long-term funding plan for?
Well, you know, that's a great new market change, right? So now the United States is one of the greatest oil producers, is the greatest oil producer in the world. I mean, we never ever thought that would be possible, right? Now you see a market, less people are buying smaller cars, they're buying bigger cars. I mean, the smaller car market, everybody wants an SUV. I mean, the market is dictating that, and Wisconsin is a huge part of that, having the frac sand. So now that the United States is the largest producer of oil, does that change how we're gonna, are there gonna be electric cars anymore? Is this all the numbers gonna change as far as oil consumption and what we're gonna be doing in the United States? Right. You know, it's not gonna be a single issue. I think the fact that part of the governor's budget of having an overseer, having the ability to have an office of investigative
right.
General. Gosh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. There's a Inspector General.
That's exactly what I'm looking for.
In the Department of Transportation.
And I think having the ability to make sure that we're design building, to have somebody to oversee what we're doing for our financials. And then, you know, it's going to be interesting what happens now that we have oil production so high in the United States.
You see any need to raise our gas tax or registration fee or go to tolling?
You know, I think the fact that we did put a fee on cars that were electric to kind of bring some sort of equality, they certainly used the roads, was as you know, trying to bring up the fees going forward. It'll be interesting to see what those numbers are going forward. I'm not a tax increase. That's not exactly what I'm interested in this time. I think we've made huge strides in what we're doing and making sure that DOT is more efficient in their use of their projects.
Should we consider tolling?
You know, I really have a hard time with the initial infrastructure costs. I think they're really high. I certainly understand the fact that we're between Minnesota and Chicago, but I haven't been sold on tolling at this point.
You formerly served in local government. Local governments have been living with levy limits for 14 years. Some local officials say it hurts their ability to provide local services. Keep levy limits to protect property tax, to keep property taxes low, dial them back, or get rid of them?
You know, you hear both sides of the conversation, and the first one is that, you know, when I knock doors, I hear from families that say, listen, we're only here 5 months out of the year, we love it here, but the taxes are too high. We're snowbirds, we live someplace else. Mm-hmm. And the other side of the conversation is, you know, I represent part of Menomonee Falls and Lannon as well. There you have the fire departments have, you know, merged themselves together. And as we are asking our departments to be leaner and smarter going forward, those are, I think, the type of things that allow us to be more efficient with our dollars.
You voted for the Foxconn incentives, and I think on February 2nd for the Kimberly-Clark. Are you afraid, as some say, that every Wisconsin company is going to come forth asking for the same tax breaks and tax benefits?
I think one of the things that we should be looking for going into the next year is making sure that all of our rules across the board are the same. Some of the words originally on the Foxconn deal that we had changed the environmental rules, and it said we were trying to streamline them. We had two levels, both a federal and a state, in trying to streamline together. And I think going forward, one of our plans should be to make sure that whatever business it is, that we are streamlined, we make sense, and they're the same type of rules going forward. The Foxconn deal was, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for this state. It's hard for people to understand that the things being built in Wisconsin won't be built anyplace else in the world. And another myth, obviously, is the fact that people think there's a pile of money that was given to Foxconn, when in reality it was a pay-as-you-go. So those incentives are only about a tax credit. They're not about providing any actual dollars going forward.
The current budget included a significant, rather large increase in state aid for K-12. What are you hearing from local school administrators, principals, superintendents? Do we need another similar large increase in the next state budget, state aid for K-12?
I think education is one of those things that with the retirement of the baby boomers, things are going to change dramatically too. Employers are looking for folks, and the traditional path was you graduate from high school, or in the high school set you up for that to grad, and then everybody was college bound. I think the high schools are going to take a different role as far as being intertwined with businesses and doing training in your junior and senior year. And I think another huge change in education is that you won't necessarily go to school immediately upon graduation. You'll work a few years, and then you'll maybe do an online courses and go back and forth through the university. I think education and formalized education in the United States is going to change dramatically with the retirement of baby boomers. And so having our high schools be more in tune with businesses, not just the universities, is going to change how we do things, and that may create some corporate sponsorships and some differences going forward.
Choice and vouchers have grown dramatically. Milwaukee to Racine now statewide.
Yeah.
Should it expand further?
Oh, absolutely. My kids have had the luxury of being both in private schools and public schools, and I think finding the right niche for your kid as they go forward and letting parents make those decisions is a big point of what makes Wisconsin great.
Big issue in the next budget is the Department of Corrections budget. We've got two prisons that were built in the 1800s. Do we need a new state prison?
Yeah, I think yes. I think that the 100-year-old prison that we're referring to in Green Bay is just a great opportunity for us to maybe look at a better way to spend money. The maintenance on that alone is millions of dollars that could be put into what we know, as you can imagine, their differences in security from 100 years ago to today is dramatic. And I think that if we want to talk about rehabilitation and make sure that folks are ready when they finish their sentences to move on to work, that would be something we'd have to talk about, and that facility would allow us to do it.
Republican, let me rephrase that, UW system budget. We've had a tuition freeze on resident undergrad for 6 years. Should it continue for a 7th and 8th years?
Yes.
It should. Why, when the UW says they have growing needs and their reserve is drawn down?
Sure, they've put a lot of money into infrastructure, and as I had mentioned before, education in the next century is going to be different. Online classes, specific classes are going to be available. Certainly not everything. There's always going to be hands-on that are necessary. But as we're doing it, I think we're going to spend less money in infrastructure and more time in developing online and making the university available to everyone.
The issues in the Capitol of legalizing both recreational and medical marijuana, your positions?
I think the cost to both of those the states that have gone forward with it have been tremendous, not only in law enforcement, but the community. As we're looking at dealing with an opiates problem and we're dealing with families that are generational drug addictions, I don't know how that's going to help Wisconsin moving forward by adding marijuana, which is a gateway drug, into the system for the state of Wisconsin.
How about medical side, on the medical side?
You know, that's one of those things that we have no solid studies from National Institute of Health on medical. There are no facts, and it's unfortunate. Maybe that's something that would, behoove all of us going forward. The marijuana that's produced right now does a lot of brain damage, and I think it's a question of, do we want to add another one of these, a drug system into the state of Wisconsin, because there will be a high cost.
Finally, differences between you and your opponent on November 6th.
I think the community is looking for a fair shake in the community, not a handout, but more or less the opportunity to keep on moving forward.
Republican Representative Janel Brandtjen is seeking re-election in the 22nd District. The election is November 6th. She's from Menomonee Falls. Representative, thanks for talking to WisconsinEye.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Campaign 2018 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, Marshfield Clinic Health System, AARP Wisconsin, and Campaign 2018 partner Milwaukee Journal Sentinel.